Next question. Do I think that people who post racist things on their social media should be subject to being outed to their employers or doxxed or publicly shamed? Yes. At least in some circumstances, I think this is a justifiable tactic. That might seem a bit aggressive, but I think you have to take that in the context of how pervasive and how destructive racism is as a social force in America. So, certainly if someone's powerful, or a public figure, or a CEO, or a celebrity, or something like that, and they're saying overtly bigoted things, then publicly shaming them for that is, I would argue, actually important and necessary. And then, even for just regular people, I think there's circumstances where this sort of online shaming can do some good. So there's recently been the case, which has just blown up on Black Twitter, of this woman who called the police on some black people who were barbecuing in a public park, and she felt they didn't have the permission to be there. I don't know who was technically right or wrong, but the bottom line is it's just a jerk move to call the police on someone for that sort of a dispute. And then when you add the racial element to it, it's even more of a jerk move. And she's just been mercilessly and really quite brilliantly parodied and trolled on the internet. And I just can't bring it in myself to feel bad for her. I think she is a victim of nothing other than her own stupidity and maybe even her own bigotry. So, as a moral consequentialist, I always assess the morality of an action by the ultimate harm done and the ultimate good done. So, in this case, yeah, there may well be some harm done to her. I'm sure she's feeling negatively about this. But because of the sort of publicity this has received, if this serves as sort of a warning, as it were, and it means that, you know, in future, maybe white people just think twice before calling the police in similar circumstances, I could well see that this one incident could lead to hundreds of less such incidents in the future, in which case, as a utilitarian, I really have to say that the net gain of this is good. And similarly, I think it would be okay to fire someone for posting overtly bigoted things online. If someone gets on their computer and is dumb enough to post under their own name, and by the way, it's super easy to post anonymously online, but if you're dumb enough to do it under your own name, where your friends and your family can see it and be like, I don't like N-words, then if your employer pulls you in and say, okay, Mr. Jones, I see you've been saying that you don't like people of other races, and a requirement of this job is that you have to work with people of other races, so I guess you won't be able to work here anymore. If, in that case, again, you are a victim of nothing other than your own stupidity, and people who that happens to are not an appropriate object of our liberal sympathy. They are not free speech martyrs. They are morons. I have a few reservations about this. So I think publishing people's home addresses, that sort of carries with it the implicit threat of violence. Although even in some cases that can be funny and appropriate. So there was this lawyer in New York who went off on a huge racist rant, and a mariachi band and party showed up outside his house. Well, that's adorable, and that's all in good fun. With that said, I would be a little bit careful about stuff that carries with it an implicit personal threat. I also wouldn't want to see this tactic used on people who, say, are merely politically conservative. I think it has to be genuine bigotry before we get this far. And as a final point, while this is one tactic that we can use, I think we should be very clear that this is a tactic that's not going to be sufficient to combat racism in this country. I think we're all walking around with the idea in our heads that people who hold overtly bigoted views, like I'm against interracial marriage, I wouldn't want to live in a neighbourhood with black people or have my children go to school with them. I think we're walking around with the idea that people who hold those views are like a fraction of a percent. they're not. Those views, if you do a public poll, will poll anywhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the question and how you ask it. There's not enough Twitter mobs in the world to deal with that. So, yes, this is one tactic, but ultimately I think we need to really recommit in a serious and sustained way to societal integration. We're as informally segregated now as we were 20 years ago. And I think all the evidence in the world shows that being separate from each other is one of the main forces breeding misunderstanding and hatred. I also think we should seriously consider something along the lines of reparations. I don't know exactly how that would work, and I think there's sensible and not sensible answers to that question, but I think it's at least a discussion that we should be having. And I'm not going to be able to cover either of those issues here. They're both big issues, but I am actively looking to get people on the podcast to cover both of them. But in short, yeah, I think when you take into account how bad racism is and how damaging it is, it's arguably the most damaging force in American social and political life, then some of the tactics we've been seeing online to combat it I view as appropriate and even ethical.